We are live. Thank you, everyone, for attending our Connecting to Chicago series. My name is Corey Barnes, and I will be your host. I work out of the Office of Multicultural Student Success, and today I have the privilege of interviewing Mark Alvey, Academic Communications Manager at the Field Museum. How's it going today, Mark?
Good, Corey. How about you?
I'm doing well. I'm enjoying the extended weekend and excited to learn about the Field Museum today.
Yeah, good. I'm
So
excited.
without further ado, yeah, exactly. So without further ado, look forward to hearing your presentation.
Okay, great. I'm going to talk just for a few minutes, folks, and share some slides, and then take a little break and see if Corey has any questions for me. Just briefly, I've worked at the Field Museum for just over 30 years. I started in May of 1990, and I've worked in about 8 different departments. And so over that time, I learned a fair bit about the museum, even though I don't have a scientific background. I've sort of developed one unknowingly over 30 years. So I thought what I would talk today, since I know a lot of you are not from the Chicago area, I just kind of give you an orientation of the museum, what it is, where it is, and that sort of thing. And then talk a little bit, take some questions if there are any, and then talk about the history of the museum, kind of how we got where we are today. I know you guys heard from Dr. Lee. I know he's not your history department, but he is kind of a historian. He told you about the burning plan of Chicago, and that ties in directly with the founding of the museum. So, Corey, if it's okay with you, I'll start up the first chunk of the slides.
Please do.
All right, here we go. So there's the Field Museum. You can see this okay, Corey?
Absolutely.
All right, good.
That's great.
Turn my laser pointer on there. So this Field Museum pretty much is a little bit slightly older picture. How many, 3 or 4 years ago. My office is right there, those 2 windows there. So I miss it. I haven't been there almost 6 months. So, but we shall see. All my friends are there, my second family. So for those of you who are not from around here, you're up in Lincoln Park. If you're on the Lincoln Park campus, I assume some of them are down in the Loop campus. And we're down here at the south end of Grant Park. That's a little bit obviously larger than the building really is, but it gives you a sense of where we are in relation. This is close to 8 miles, a little bit too long to walk, but you can get there by various L and bus combinations. Downtown, of course, you can walk. If you come to the museum, which I hope you do, it's open now to the public, but when the time comes that you want something scientific and cultural to do, you'll see, and what most of the people that have grown up around here will see, and what they think of us as is an exhibit of, a museum of exhibits. So Sue is kind of our signature exhibit now, world's largest and most complete T-Rex. But we also have lots of exhibits, maybe at least half of our exhibits are about world cultures. So there's the Northwest Coast Pacific, Egypt. We have probably the biggest collection of mummies on display anywhere. China Hall is recent. Ancient Americas is just fantastic, gorgeous. These are just a teeny slice of some of the things you could see. Birds, a lot of stuffed animals, my favorite, taxidermy. These are probably the most famous taxidermy animals we have. The man-eaters of Savo. If you saw a really lousy 1996 movie called The Ghost in the Darkness, that was based on their story. And the plant hall, very seldom visited, but really one of the most beautiful halls in the museum. So that's what you would see when you went to the exhibit galleries. Now, if you could lift the top off the museum, like this blow up, thanks to the Sun Times has done, you would see more than what you would see in the exhibits, to say the least. Each of these quadrants are the main collections-based departments of the museum: anthropology, botany, geology, zoology. There's 3 to 4 floors of labs and collections in each of these quadrants, also offices, but wet labs, the DNA lab, we'll talk about in a second. And then in around 2000, we dug underground. I didn't do any digging myself, but they dug underground and built a 170,000 square foot collection storage facility of 2 levels. Bottom floor is wet collection, so dead things in jars and oversized dinosaur and mastodon bones and so forth. Cryogenics lab. And then the next floor up is mostly anthropological collections, Africa, Pacific, North America, and oversized. A few zoological things along here too. There's a a little bit more has been expanded since then. Some anthro stuff back in here, but anyway, just what you see on exhibit is the tip of the iceberg. So if you were to wander around the third floor, for the most part, which is where the research is, you'd see plants, you'd see dinosaur bones, you'd see visiting scientists, birds, meteorites. That's the Tully monster for those of you who are from Illinois. That's the Illinois state fossil. You'd see stuffed rats. Those are called study skins. Those are not taxidermy specimens. Anthropological artifacts, conservation lab, butterfly snakes, tissue being collected in the cryo facility underground, and the DNA lab and their new state-of-the-art, what is that called? High throughput next generation DNA sequencer. So what you don't see in the public exhibits is the research that goes on behind the scenes. We've got less than 1% of the materials on display. It's over 30 million objects and specimens and counting. 150 research collections and lab staff. We have teachers, educators, and teacher training for K through 12 in the museum and in the classrooms. We have 60 PhDs and conservation ecologists who publish papers just like your professors do, as well as do outreach and conservation action, which has been very successful over the past just under 20 years in the Andes, Amazon, and Chicago. 700 plus visiting researchers, as I mentioned, every year. Active loan program, tens of thousands of specimens get loaned to other museums and researchers over the year, and 200 plus interns every year. And I mentioned that by way of mentioning, well, that's too soon for that slide, by mentioning why I said yes when they said we're looking for somebody to talk to DePaul, because every year for the past at least 10 and maybe closer to 15, I've done a behind the scenes tour showing all this stuff for the Science in the City class for two different professors. The most current one is Mary Bridget Kustich, if I'm pronouncing her last name correctly. So DePaul is kind of a special place in my heart, and the interns are relevant there because every year, several of the kids, sorry, you guys are my kids' age, so I'm going to call you kids. Several of the students get excited about things that they see behind the scenes. For the most part, skinning birds and mammals seems to be the most interesting to people. So we end up harvesting a few, it sounds terrible, doesn't it? But we end up getting a few interns every year from DePaul who saw something that interested them, whether it be botany, skinning birds. Birds is maxed out. They don't want any more volunteers right now. It's so popular for one reason. I'll get that disgusting beaver off the screen for the time being. But the second reason that I said yes was because I know you heard from Dr. Lee about the Burnham's Chicago plan in your last go round. So I thought that would be a good, and that ties in with the history of the museum. So that's the next thing I'll talk about. But I thought I'll go ahead and close down the screen for a second and see if there's any questions or anything like that, so I don't jabber too long.
Yeah, I don't see any questions coming in, but okay. I had a question. I mean, just based on what you shared, how did you become interested in the Burnham plan and in relation to the World's Fair? Because you talked about the World's Fair, and that's kind of been reoccurring. And, you know, being in Chicago and myself, I've known about I think it was the World Columbian Fair of 1893, something to that effect.
World Columbian Exposition,
Exactly, and all the things that have kind of come from that, including Burnham being, like, I guess, the kind of the architect for that plan in Chicago, wanting to kind of get him to come back and create this plan, and how it ties into the Field Museum. So just your interest in it and kind of like, you know, kind of sharing it out.
That's an easy one because I started out, my first job in 1990 was in the photo archives because I worked in a photo archive before, and I got really interested in, I have a history background, but history of film and television, so it's a little bit different. But the old photographs, some of which are dating back to the 1890s on glass plate negatives, not film even. They were on glass. It's another whole issue, but fascinating photographs, and the history of the museum is documented in those photographs, and you can't get interested in the history of the Field Museum without getting interested in the World's Fair of 1893, because that's where we started. And you can't get interested in the World's Fair without getting at least a little interested in Burnham, Daniel Burnham, and kind of his vision for the city, which didn't come to pass, but aspects of it aspects of it did. In fact, the next bit that I talk about is sort of the founding of the Field Museum out of the fair, because we grew directly out of the collections of the fair. And we started out on the old fairgrounds, as a matter of fact. So if you want, I could jump right into that. And then
please do.
Go. Okay, I'll do that. I'll blow this up again. Tell me if there's a technical problem, but it seems amazingly easy. So Dr. Lee showed you this drawing of the really big sky view of the Burnham plan. And but the interesting connection to the museum is that as far as the lakefront, let me throw my laser on again. As far as the lakefront, the Field Museum was the centerpiece of his vision of the lakefront. That's the Field Museum right there, Field Columbia Museum, as it was called at the time. And that dates back, so flashing back to 14 or 15 years earlier, the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893. So there it is, kind of a bird's eye view, so to speak, of the fair. And some of you, if you've read The Devil in the White City, which was a bestseller a few years ago, really good book on the fair, probably the best short history of the fair in existence, but also intertwined with this story of America's first serial killer, so-called. And even at the point that doesn't seem to happen in 2015, Martin Scorsese and Leonardo DiCaprio were talking about making a movie out of this, with DiCaprio being the serial killer. It never got off the ground as far as I know, but it would be interesting, and DiCaprio would be great in that role. But if you haven't read the book, read it. Okay. So the World's Fair, if you know anything about it, it was a celebration. It was really a trade show more than anything. All these countries and states showing off their products, from armaments to chocolate. And it was also kind of an ethnographic exhibit in certain areas, certain buildings, and sections of the fair. There's one example. There's the Inuit, Labrador Inuit, aka Eskimos, and those they were doing a demonstration. They would do dog sledding, and they're cracking their whips in this situation. So a little strange in terms of the ethnocentrism of how some of these cultures were presented, but that's another issue. And obviously it was the late 19th century, so it's not much of a surprise. But electricity was a big deal. Electricity was showcased at the fair, all sorts of products and technology. And the first Ferris wheel was at the World's Fair then. And this is a view from the Ferris wheel of the Midway. So I'll show you once again one of my little maps here. You're up in DePaul, Lincoln Park. Here's a Field Museum, and I'll blow this up. So this was down in Jackson Park, down around 57th, 63rd, in that area, right along the lakefront. I'll jump forward. That's the footprint as it appears today. Back one. Oops, sorry. Get your bearings there. Okay. So that's a map of the fair. That's like a tourist map of the fair. And that's the map today. The sheer size and scope is what always boggles my mind. It was 670, 680 acres, depending on what source you read. And if you try to think about the closest analog of the physical space and what you might do as a let's say a tourist, you might think of the Magic Kingdom, Orlando, if you've ever gone to, if it's your cup of tea, gone to Disney World. But if you plot the Magic Kingdom and Epcot Center together, it still would not even take up maybe 2/3 of the fair. It was just vast. You couldn't see everything in 2 weeks. They talk about 27 million people visited the fair. The truth is they sold 27 million tickets. I don't think they really know how many people visited, but I'm sure a lot of those were repeat visitors, because a lot of people went for 2 days because they couldn't see everything. How long does it take you to see the whole Magic Kingdom of Epcot? I don't know, because I haven't spent that much time there, thank God. But the Midway and the state and country buildings were huge. And this kind of leads us into the museum, because there were all these exhibits from all over the world. Let me look at my note here. There were 18 countries alone had buildings on their own. And then more countries, like Russia, for example, didn't have its own building, but they had their stuff set up to showcase their furs and minerals and whatnot in one of the other the manufacturers. And liberal arts building. The horticulture building had plants from Japan and plant products, and on and on and on. So 18 countries, 37 states and territories had separate buildings. There were only 44 states in the Union at that time. So everybody was showing off their stuff, basically, and different countries. Haiti had a building. There was a old exhibit of, I'm blanking out now, like a Morocco, Tunisia exhibit, that sort of thing. So they were showing off other cultures and their products as well. So it was, like I say, it was like a combination trade show and anthropology exhibit. There were 60,000. Somebody must have counted it, but what I've read, I'm not going to go count it myself, but there were 60,000 separate exhibits, and anything from electric fans to, like I said, chocolate. There were 3 or 4 just chocolate companies that had their stuff, bicycles, you name it. Cracker Jack started there. A lot of companies that we still have around today started at the Crack. I can't think of any others. So when the fair closed, the stuff had to go somewhere. Some people took their stuff back, but by 1890, so the fair opened in October of late October 1890. This is wrong. That's 18. This is not. This is from an old scrapbook from 1894, but this is. Let me think for a second. Is that right? I think it's 1893. Anyway, 1890, 3 years before the fair even opened, they were talking about building a permanent museum growing out of the fair. So when the fair closed, Marshall Field, some of the civic leaders had badgered him over the years to fund a museum. He said no for a while. He finally said yes. He was a department store guy who now the store is Macy's downtown, but he gave $1 million, and that when the fair closed in 1893. Yeah, this is wrong. That should say 1893. That's interesting because this note is from 1893. The guy wrote down the wrong year. I just noticed that. Anyway, the stuff was assembled as buildings closed. They started gathering up material in the Palace of Fine Arts, which was the art gallery of the museum up there on the north end of the fairgrounds. And it might look familiar to some of you Chicagoans today. I'll tell you why in a few minutes, but that's how it looked in 1893. And it's just what it sounded like. It was the art museum for the fair. It was art from all over the world, fine art, European paintings, art and sculpture from Japan and elsewhere. So when the fair closed, the art started going out and other stuff started coming in. And it was just a hodgepodge. I just threw a few slides up here. Our 4 main departments, like I mentioned when I showed you the blowout map, are geology, zoology, and birds together, anthro and botany. But they were taking anything they could get, basically. They had transportation, they had trains, they had boats, they had flying machines. They had a couple rooms devoted to Columbus with artifacts from his life, a department of ceramics, lots and lots of stuffed animals. There was a statuary hall. There was a section of musical instruments. So it was just an amalgam of stuff from across the fair. But by 1905, they had, like I say, by 1900, they had already gotten rid of the industrial arts. I don't know why they thought it was a good idea to collect everything, but I think they didn't have a vision of what the museum would be like at that time. But by 1905, they renamed the museum from Field Columbian Museum to Field Museum of Natural History. I didn't mention that it was named after Mr. Marshall Field, of course. So the 4 traditional departments that are here in 1905 are still with us today by that name. So a few of the things from the fair. This was inside the anthropology building, but it included a section from Ward's Natural Science Establishment in Rochester, New York, which is still in business today. If you've dissected a cat in high school a year or two ago, chances are it came from Ward's. But you take a quick peek here up here, you've got a big whale skeleton. You can't see there's an octopus, just one tentacle hanging there, a mastodon, there's a dinosaur there, and a giant squid hanging there. We still have a lot of that stuff in the museum today. So our founding collections were formed from the World's Fair, from all over. So I'll just show you a few of those. Anytime you want to jump in, Corey, and shut me up and ask me a question, go ahead. Because
Sure. Yeah, I do have a few questions I want to ask, just so
okay.
students kind of know how to get around. So for students who've never been to the Field Museum and they arrive, what are some exhibits you recommend they have to see for a person who's never been to the Field
Um,
Museum?
People are probably going to want to go see Sue, the dinosaur. Uh,
Okay.
People ask me that a lot, but I think a lot of it depends on what you like, because people tend toward the cultural exhibits. The China Hall is really new. Ancient Americas is new. They're redoing the Native North American Hall. So if you want to see objects from these cultures that you won't see anywhere else, I mean, you could look at it as cultural material. You could look at it as art. Our old president, who worked, who ran the museum when I first came here, called the Field the second largest art museum in Chicago, which is true after the Art Institute. Because if you look at all the ethnographic material, it is art, what would have one time years ago been called primitive art. And in fact, some of the material at the Art Institute in their Africa and China Hall is on long-term loan from the Field Museum. So it's a little bit of a gray area between what is what's art and what's ethnography. But I personally like the taxidermy, and it's still a lot of museums over the years have gotten rid of their dioramas, but we haven't, fortunately, because they've had a resurgence of interest. So kids always like them. Kids always like the stuffed animals, but they've recontextualized some of the exhibits with a kind of conservation message in terms of like national parks and that sort of thing. So plus they're just cool. I've gotten into the history of the taxidermy and that sort of thing. Egypt is always popular. I'll show you some of the stuff. Actually, I've got pictures of contemporary exhibits now, material that's still on display from the fair, if that's all right.
Yeah, please. Let's check it out.
Yeah. So the right whale that I showed up in the rafters here is still here. So this was in the Field Columbia Museum in 1898. And there it is today in the Animal Kingdom Hall. This paper mache model, also from Ward's, is still in the museum. This thing was not real. It was mastodon made of plant fiber. It got thrown out, I'm sure, but it was not a real specimen. So, but the paper mache octopus is still there. Paper mache squid from Ward's is still there. The lion and tiger are still here. This guy is not on display, but we brought him out for a World's Fair exhibit in 2014. But the tiger is still in the Animal Hall. These are back in the 80s before they got all the animal halls got reconfigured in the early 90s. Some of the birds from our first bird curator are still in the collection. The ceramics, I showed these ceramics as part of the hodgepodge. These big Berlin vases are gone, but those are still here. So this Japanese vase from the World's Fair and the Etruscan vase are still, this is on display in a conference room, and this is back in the Anthropology Collections. These are out of order. That's fine, but lots of animals are still in the exhibit. Ward's also sold us meteorites, which are in the collection still. We have one of the top 4 meteorite collections in the world, a lot on exhibit. These you can see up in the Gem Hall. I had a picture of that on that slide. I forgot to mention. The Gem Hall is new. It's pretty cool. It looks like a jewelry store, which you have to get up
it looks cool.
Close at the stuff. And a lot of the stuff in there, I would a ton, but probably at least 20% is from our original Tiffany collection. These guys are still on exhibit up in the prehistoric hall. Giant ground sloth, mastodon. He fixed his tusks there. You can see they were put in the wrong way in 1895. The Irish elk is still here. The dinosaur got thrown out because it wasn't real and it was inaccurate. I didn't remove some of the slides I meant to remove. Invertebrate fossils are still in the collection too. Sorry. And plant products, we still have some on exhibit, some back in the collections. We got a lot of plant products, indigo, cinnamon oils, hemp, and brushes, a lot of things made from plants. Anthropology Collection, this is no longer on display. This was the Gamelon. It's like a gong percussion orchestra that was played in the Java Theater in the Java Village. It's still in the collections, and it was played actually at concerts up until the early 90s. These totem poles are on display in the main hall. This one's back in the Northwest Coast Hall. This is probably one of my favorite halls, since you asked, Corey. The Northwest Coast. It's very dramatic. I had a little picture of it toward the beginning, but it's very dramatic. It was done in the late 80s.
Okay.
Some of the information is outdated, and I know they would like to redo it, but in terms of aesthetics, it's just beautiful. And they have a lot of the material. We have one of the best Northwest Coast ethnographic collections anywhere, and a lot of it is on exhibit. In the early to mid 1990s, we went through a phase where they wanted the exhibits to be more interactive and less objects on display, which to me, if you've got 32 million objects behind the scenes, put them on display so people can see them, because that's why we have museums. But at any rate, these things are still with us on public display. Two of the totem poles and the grizzly bear totem pole. So yeah, visit the Northwest Coast Hall if you want a beautiful experience. Hopewell, very important archaeological dig that was commissioned for the fair, is in our new Ancient Americas Hall. And of course, you got to talk about mummies at the Field Museum. These mummies were collected the year after the fair closed by our first president, but he purchased them for the museum. So these did not come from the fair, the one thing that I've shown. And they are all on exhibit. There's a kind of a matchup of that one is there and those two are there from this 1895 photo. And this one traveled in a traveling exhibit. It's not on permanent exhibit as far as I know. So getting back to how we got to the location we're at today, if you want me to go into that for a minute, unless you have any other questions, Corey.
I did. So for students who are interested in going to the Field Museum, are you all currently open right now? And then also, are there virtual offerings?
Yeah, the museum is open. They've got all these various safety protocols in place. Anybody that works behind the scenes, if you don't have to go in, we were asked to stay home just to keep everybody safe. But they've got the plexiglass screens, and everybody's required to wear a mask, and so they're handling it really well. They talked about it long and hard. So yeah, it's open now. I encourage people to get down there
awesome.
if you can. And I'll put in a plug before I forget. If you take the Science in the City class when you're a freshman or after COVID is over, then maybe you'll see me on a behind the scenes tour, which is one of my favorite things to do. So the next couple of years before I retire. So yeah, and back to the exhibits, a lot of it depends on what you like. I would say don't miss the Northwest Coast Hall and the Gem Hall and that sort of thing when you get there. So if I still have time, I'll talk about how we got from the fair to the present building. But if we're running short on time, I can wrap it up too. It's up to you.
I think we have about a minute or two left. So okay. if that's enough time, then
we just flash the slide. So here's where Burnham pictured the museum. Overlaid a little map there. So that's where it looked in Grant Park. But remember, in 1907, that was still part of Lake Michigan. This was all being gradually filled in. So if you go back to the Field Museum, Lake Michigan, that's where Buckingham Fountain is today. If you know Buckingham Fountain or walk over there, that was all landfill at that time. Burnham decided he would try to cheat and put the museum on an island. Tried to black out that background, but it didn't work. But so that would still all have been lake. And he wrote anonymous letters. People think that he wrote these signed Mr. Nobody. Montgomery Ward, the department store guy, opposed any building on the lakefront, and he had some legal stuff to back him up. So for a long time, they thought that they would put it next to the above, just north of the old palace. But then at the last minute, the Illinois Central Railroad donated some land where we are now, which was still not filled in yet. And they moved all the stuff up in 1920. There's the elephants, our famous elephants with one of his heads sticking. That's one of the totem poles from the main hall. Moved it all up by train car to our present building. And if you'll notice from this 1921 photo, where Soldier Field is now, the football field where the Bears play, still lakefront. So they are still filling, moving north, filling everything in. So we're built on a garbage dump, basically. Opening day, May 2nd, 1921. The old palace was falling apart, so it got torn down and reconfigured, and it's now the Museum of Science and Industry. So some people say it's the last original remaining building from the fair. It's really not. The underlying steel and brick are the same, but they reclad it inside and out. So it's really a 1930s era building, but The Art Institute actually was built for the fair, so it's really the last remaining building from the 1893 World's Fair, and that's another must place to visit too. So there we are.
Yeah, we had the Art Institute, Sam Ramos from Art Institute,
Yeah.
couple. Yeah, so I didn't know the connection. Now I'm starting to see the connection. The World's
That
Fair,
was built. That was built
things.
Permanent building. All the fair buildings that you see on the map and in these beautiful photos of the White City were temporary buildings. They were the material they were built of was not brick. It was a really lightweight sort of plaster and stucco material that you could mold into bricks, and into all the sculpture in the fair for the most part was made from that too. It was easily moldable. They needed to build the thing fast. So anyway, that's how we got from the fair to on Jackson Park to the Field Museum on the at the south end of Grant Park, thanks to the Illinois Central Railroad for giving us the land literally at the last minute. They were ready to start building down at the Jackson Park site when they said, hey, would you like this land in Grant Park? And the museum said, sure. So anyway, I think that's, there's the sky view again. So up here where the palace.
Wow. Yeah, that's 1893, right?
1893, right?
Yeah.
And they kept that old building going for whatever that is, 1893 to 1920, when they, so for more than going on 30 years, when they finally moved out. So,
wow.
I'll reduce this now so you can see my face again.
All right. Well, thank you so much for this great session. I learned a lot, and I'm sure our viewers did as well. There is one final question that I have to know. I have to ask. Where's your favorite place to eat in Chicago?
In the city of Chicago?
In the city.
In the city, I'll be honest, where I tend to go, there's places that like my boss takes us that are fancy and stuff like that. We go out for a birthday or Christmas, but there's a diner in the Pittsfield building, if you know where that is, and look it up. Do you know where that is? Yeah,
I do. I've had brunch there at Pittsfield.
Yeah, the Pittsfield Cafe. There's a fancy Italian restaurant in there too, but back in the back, there's an old diner. There's no diners left in Chicago anymore except that one. So in the morning, if I can get there early enough and still be on time to work, it's a beautiful building from, I think, 1928 that actually the Field Museum used to own. The museum was given that building as an asset by Marshall Field III, as I recall, grandson of Marshall Field, the founder. But there's other fancy places you can eat. And my kids like this place that we just went today, Ramen Wasabi in Logan Square. But the Pittsfield, I'm an old guy, right? So the Pittsfield Cafe for breakfast.
Nice.
2 by 2 by 2, which is two pancakes, two eggs.
Can't go wrong.
Two sausage, and the coffee's good, and the people are so nice.
It is really good. It is
like walking back in time. So might not be to all taste, but it's not expensive either. So
yeah, very good. No, I definitely recommend both places. Wasabi is awesome as well. Really enjoy their
it's really good
noodles. Yeah, so both. I recommend both. So if folks check those out, I'm sure they'll enjoy.
All right. Okay.
So thank you again. I really appreciate it, and have a good evening. Thanks again, Mark.
Appreciate it a lot. Everybody, welcome to Chicago. Welcome to school.
Thank you.